Hey there, my dear friends. Have you ever found a little piece of the past that made your heart skip a beat? Like a song from your youth playing on the radio. I'm Eva, your 65-year-old storyteller from the quiet streets of Eufaula, Alabama, where the dogwoods bloom and the lake whispers memories. Sitting on my porch swing, sipping sweet tea, I feel you all out there, my kindred spirits, sharing life's joys and sorrows. Today, I'm opening my heart to tell you a story that's as real as the creak of this old swing, about love, loss, and finding strength when you think you've got none left. If my tales touch you, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Let's sit a spell and unravel this together, like old friends catching up over coffee. Have you ever held something so small it could fit in your palm, yet so heavy it carried the weight of your whole world? That's how I felt, sitting in Bob's study tonight, the little brass key he left me cold against my skin. I'm Maggie Sullivan, 70 years young, living in a modest brick house at 312 Willow Lane in Franklin, Tennessee, where the oak trees turn gold every fall and the air smells of honeysuckle in spring. My life, to like this town, has always been quiet, steady, rooted in family. But tonight, in the glow of Bob's old desk lamp, I found something that shook those roots to their core. If you're out there, maybe sipping coffee on your own porch, I hope you'll sit with me a spell. This story's about love, betrayal, and the strength we find when we think we've got none left. And if it touches you, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and drop a note. Where are you watching from? Let's walk this road together. It was October 2025, and the leaves outside were falling like soft whispers, piling up against the fence in our backyard. Bob, my husband of 50 years, had been gone a week, taken by the cancer that came back meaner than before. His study, with its oak-paneled walls and faint smell of pipe tobacco, was the only place I could still feel him. His model train sat unfinished on the shelf, and his favorite armchair held the shape of him, like he might walk in any minute and tease me about my burnt biscuits. But he wasn't coming back, and that truth hit me harder every day. The key came in an envelope from Mr. Donovan, our lawyer, handed to me after Bob's funeral. Tucked inside was a note in Bob's slanted handwriting. When you're ready. Maggie, love, Bob. I'd carried it in my pocket for days, not sure what ready meant. Tonight, though, something pulled me to his study. Maybe it was the silence of the house, or the way the moonlight slipped through the window, silver on the hardwood floor. I sat at his desk, the key in my hand, and stared at the small safe tucked behind his bookshelves. It was one of those old-fashioned ones, barely big enough for a stack of papers, and I'd never paid it much mind. Bob handled things like that: bills, deeds, the practical stuff, while I kept the kitchen warm and the kids fed. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock. The click was soft, but it echoed in my chest like a door swinging open. Inside, I found two things that stopped my breath. The first was a thick manila envelope, sealed with tape, labeled "For Maggie" in Bob's careful script. The second was a piece of watercolor paper, yellowed at the edges, with a painting I hadn't seen in decades. It was mine, from 1972, a sunset over Percy Priest Lake, all oranges and purples bleeding into the water. I'd painted it the summer Bob proposed, back when I dreamed of being an artist, before I traded my brushes for diaper bags and casserole dishes. I touched the paper, and it was like touching the girl I used to be, full of hope and fire. How had Bob kept this all these years, and why was it here, now? With this envelope, I set the painting aside, my heart pounding, and opened the envelope. Inside were papers that told a story I'd suspected but never wanted to believe. Bank statements showed thousands of dollars moved from Dan's accounts to one in Lauren's name alone. Screenshots of text messages, printed out, where Lauren mocked our family to her friends. calling Bob and me stingy old fools and joking about cashing in when Bob passed. Worst of all was a letter from a divorce lawyer, dated 3 months ago, outlining Lauren's plan to leave Dan as soon as she secured what she thought would be a big inheritance. I sat back, the papers trembling in my hands, and felt a wave of grief not for me, but for Dan, my son, who'd loved her so fiercely he'd lost himself. Dan, my boy with Bob's blue eyes and that shy smile, was 40 now, working long hours in real estate to keep up with Lauren's expensive tastes. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being the kid who carved his name into our kitchen table and started being a stranger who missed Sunday dinners. Lauren, his wife, had a way of filling his calendar with charity galas and networking events, leaving no room for us. And me, I'd let it happen, thinking love meant patience, thinking Dan would come back to us on his own. But these papers, left by Bob like a map, told me I'd waited too long. I closed my eyes, and a memory came, clear as day. It was 1972, and Bob and I were sitting on a blanket by Percy Priest Lake, the water shimmering under the setting sun. I was 17, paint smudged on my fingers, showing him my latest watercolor. "You're going to be famous." "Maggie," he said, his grin wide as the sky, "but I'm keeping you anyway." He kissed me, and I knew I'd follow him anywhere. That painting, now in my hands, was from that day. Bob had seen me, all of me, even the dreams I'd buried. And now, even from beyond, he was asking me to see myself again. But what was I supposed to do with these papers? Give them to Dan and break his heart, keep them hidden and let Lauren keep pulling him away? I thought of Ethan, my grandson, only 8, with his gap-toothed smile and love for catching fireflies. If Lauren left Dan, she'd take Ethan, use him as leverage. I couldn't let that happen. Bob had left me this key for a reason, and I had to trust him, like I always had. Let me take you back a bit, so you understand how we got here. Franklin's a small town, the kind where folks wave from their porches, and the Meredith's Breadbasket Bakery smells like heaven on Sunday mornings. Bob and I moved here in '75, raised our kids Dan and Sarah in this house on Willow Lane. Bob was an engineer, steady as the oak tree in our backyard, and I was the mom who baked cookies for school fundraisers and cheered at Dan's football games. Sarah, our daughter, is 38 now, a nurse with a heart as big as Tennessee. She's my rock, always has been. But Dan, well, Dan's story got complicated when he met Lauren. It was 7 days ago, at Bob's funeral in the First Presbyterian Church, that everything started unraveling. The church was packed, the pews filled with old friends, neighbors, and folks from Bob's days at the engineering firm. The stained glass windows cast red and blue light across the room, and the air was thick with the scent of lilies, Bob's favorite. I stood at the podium, my hands shaking as I tried to sum up 50 years of love in a few words. "Bob was my home," I said, my voice cracking. He taught me that love isn't just the big moments, it's the quiet ones, like holding hands on the porch swing. I was halfway through when I heard it. Lauren's voice, not quite a whisper, carried by the microphone near her pew. "Maggie's putting on quite a show, isn't she?" she said to her friend, a smirk in her tone, as if Bob wasn't done with her years ago. The words hit me like a slap, and the room went still. A few folks gasped, others turned to look. Sarah, sitting beside me, gripped my hand, her eyes blazing. "How dare she?" she muttered. But Dan, sitting next to Lauren, just stared at the floor, his face red. He didn't say a word, didn't defend me. That hurt worse than Lauren's cruelty. I finished my speech, somehow, and sat down, my legs like jelly. The rest of the service was a blur: hymns, prayers, the pastor's kind words. All I could think was how 50 years with Bob, all our love, had been reduced to gossip in his own church. As we filed out, Lauren walked ahead with Dan, her designer heels clicking on the stone floor, her head high like she'd won something. I wanted to scream, to tell her she didn't know a thing about us, but I didn't. I just held Sarah's hand and kept walking. Sarah drove me home, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Mom, you don't deserve that," she said, her voice tight. "Lauren's poison, and Dan's letting her get away with it." I nodded, too tired to argue. "He's still our Dan," I said softly. "Somewhere in there, he's still the boy who loved us." Sarah didn't answer, but her eyes said she wasn't so sure. That night, I sat on the porch swing, the one Bob built when Dan was born. The oak tree loomed above, its branches swaying in the cool October breeze. I thought about Dan as a boy, running through the yard with a kite, laughing so hard he'd fall over. I thought about Bob, teaching him to throw a football, both of them muddy and grinning. Where had that Dan gone, and how had Lauren, with her polished smile and sharp tongue, taken him so far from us? Lauren came into our lives 10 years ago, when Dan brought her to dinner at our house. She was beautiful, no denying that blonde hair swept up, a dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She talked about growing up poor in Clarksville, working double shifts at a diner to pay for college. I felt for her, thought maybe her ambition came from a hard life. But Bob saw something else. She's got dollar signs in her eyes. "Maggie," he whispered later, squeezing my hand under the table. I brushed it off, wanting to believe Dan had found someone who loved him. But Bob was right. As usual, their wedding was a spectacle, all Lauren's doing. Dan, who'd always been happy with simple things, spent nearly everything he had on a venue in downtown Franklin, with chandeliers and a 5-piece band. Bob and I chipped in what we could, but Lauren made it clear it wasn't enough. "It's sweet how your parents try." I overheard her tell Dan at the reception, her voice dripping with pity. "But they don't get how important appearances are." Dan just nodded, already slipping under her spell. Over the years, Lauren pulled Dan further away. Family dinners became rare, then stopped altogether. Birthdays were forgotten, holidays cancelled with excuses about work. When Ethan was born, I hoped things would change, but Lauren kept us at arm's length. "Dan's building his career," she'd say, as if we were a burden, and Bob's cancer, when it came 3 years ago, only made it worse. Lauren pushed for hospice over treatment, saying it was practical. Sarah fought her, wanting to try everything to save Bob. But Dan sided with Lauren, and I was caught in the middle, watching my husband fade. The funeral was the breaking point, but it wasn't the end. That envelope from Mr. Donovan, with Bob's note and key, was a lifeline. Bob had always been 3 steps ahead, planning for us even when he knew he wouldn't be here. As I sat in his study, the papers spread out on the desk, I felt him beside me, urging me to act, but how Dan was fragile, caught in Lauren's web. If I showed him the truth, would he hate me for it, or would he finally see what Bob had seen all along? I looked at the watercolor painting again, the lake glowing under that long-ago sunset. It was more than a memory, it was a reminder. I wasn't just Bob's widow, or Dan's mother, or Lauren's punching bag. I was Maggie, a woman who'd once dreamed big, who'd loved fiercely, who'd built a family through good times and bad. Maybe it was time to pick up that brush again, to paint a new chapter, not just for Dan and Ethan, but for me. The oak tree outside rustled, like it was agreeing with me. I tucked the papers back into the envelope, my resolve hardening. Tomorrow, I'd call Sarah, maybe even Mr. Donovan. I'd figure out what Bob wanted me to do with this truth. For now, I held the painting close, feeling a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. This is just the start of my story. Friends, and I'm so glad you're here with me. If it stirred something in you, maybe a memory of your own family or a time you found strength you didn't know you had, I'd love for you to join me for the rest. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. Where are you watching from? And what keeps you fighting for the ones you love? Let's keep unraveling this together. Like a quilt, we're stitching one square at a time. Good morning, my friends. Have you ever looked at an old photo and felt time slip away? Like you could reach out and touch the people you used to be? I'm Maggie Sullivan, still here at 312 Willow Lane in Franklin, Tennessee, where the coffee's brewing and the oak tree out back is dropping leaves like memories. Yesterday, I told you about the night I opened Bob's safe, found those papers that laid Lauren's betrayal bare, and held that watercolor painting from my youth. It's been a restless night, thinking about Dan, my boy, and how we got to this place. If you're out there, maybe with your own cup of coffee, I'm grateful you're listening. Let's sit together and unravel how our family started to break and how I'm starting to believe we can mend it. It's a crisp October morning in 2025, and I'm in my kitchen, the heart of this old house. The linoleum's worn where Bob used to stand, sneaking bites of my cornbread, and the table still has Dan's name scratched into it from when he was 10. There's a photo on the fridge, taken at the Main Street Festival back in 2015 before everything changed. Bob's got Ethan on his shoulders, Sarah's laughing with a lemonade in hand, and Dan's arm is around Lauren, both of them smiling like the world was theirs. I look at that photo now, and it's like staring at strangers. How did we drift so far from that day, when the bluegrass music played and the air smelled of kettle corn? I pour my coffee, the steam curling up like a prayer, and sit by the window. The oak tree sways, its branches heavy with gold leaves, and I think about the past, trying to trace where the cracks in our family began. It's funny how life works. You don't see the fractures until they're too wide to ignore. For me, it started 10 years ago, when Dan brought Lauren home to meet us. But to tell you that story, I need to take you back to the days when this house was full of noise and love. It was 2005, a warm spring evening, and Bob and I were setting the table for Sunday dinner. Sarah was home from college, her nursing textbooks scattered on the couch. And Dan, 25 then, was nervous as a cat in a room full of rockers. "Mom, Dad, she's special," he said, pacing the kitchen. "Just give her a chance." Bob raised an eyebrow, his way of saying he'd reserve judgment, and I smoothed my apron, hoping this girl was as good as Dan thought. When Lauren walked in, I'll admit, she took my breath away. Blonde hair swept up, a silk blouse that screamed money, and a smile that could charm the birds from the trees. She shook my hand, her grip firm, and said, "Mrs. Sullivan, Dan's told me so much about y'all. This house is just darling." Her accent was pure Clarksville, a town about an hour north, and she spun a story about growing up poor, working double shifts at a diner to pay for college. I felt a pang of sympathy. Maybe that's why she held herself so tight, like she was afraid of slipping back to those days. Bob, though, wasn't sold. As we passed the mashed potatoes, he caught my eye and squeezed my hand under the table, our old signal for something's off. "Later, in bed," he whispered. "She's got dollar signs in her eyes. Maggie, watch out for our boy." I brushed it off, thinking Bob was being overprotective. Dan was smitten, and Lauren seemed to light him up in a way I hadn't seen before. He'd always been quiet, content with simple things, a fishing trip with Bob, a burger at Puckett's grocery. But Lauren had big dreams, and Dan wanted to give them to her. I told myself love changes people, and maybe that wasn't a bad thing. By 2010, they were married, and that wedding was something else. Lauren turned it into a spectacle at the Canton plantation, with chandeliers, a string quartet, and a cake taller than Ethan is now. Dan, who'd once saved his allowance for a used bike, drained his savings to pay for it. Bob and I chipped in, but Lauren made it clear our contribution was small potatoes. It's sweet how your parents try. I heard her tell Dan at the reception, her voice syrupy with pity. But they don't get how important appearances are. I stood there, holding a glass of sweet tea, feeling like an outsider at my own son's wedding. Dan just nodded, his eyes on Lauren, like she was the only one in the room. The changes in Dan were slow at first, like water wearing down a stone. He called less, stopped by only when Lauren was too busy to notice. Sunday dinners, once sacred in this house, became a thing of the past. Dan's got a big deal closing, Lauren would say. Or, we're at a charity gala. I'd see her Instagram post Lauren in a cocktail dress, Dan in a suit, smiling at some fancy event in Nashville. But Dan's smile never reached his eyes, not like it did when he was a boy, running through the yard with a kite. Bob saw it clearer than I did. She's isolating him. Maggie, he said one night in 2012 as we sat on the porch swing, turning him into someone he's not. I didn't want to believe it. I kept hoping Lauren would soften, that motherhood would bring her closer to us. When Ethan was born in 2017, I thought maybe it would. I knitted him a blanket, blue like the Tennessee sky, and drove to their house with a casserole. But Lauren barely looked at it. Thanks. Maggie, she said, already checking her phone. We're just so busy with the baby. Dan hugged me, but it was quick, like he was afraid of lingering too long. The real fracture came when Bob got sick in 2022. The doctors found lung cancer, caught early, and said he had a good shot. But treatment was expensive, and Lauren didn't hide her thoughts. At a tense family meeting in our living room, she leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping the coffee table. We need to be practical, she said. These treatments could wipe out your savings. And for what? A few extra years. Even Dan looked shocked, his mouth half open. Sarah, sitting across from her, snapped. He's our dad. Lauren, we don't give up on him. Lauren backtracked, tears in her eyes, saying she was just worried. But I saw the calculation in her face, and so did Bob. Bob beat the cancer that time, but it took something out of him. He started keeping records. I later learned bank statements, messages, anything that showed Lauren's true colors. He never told me, maybe to spare me the pain. But he was planning, always 3 steps ahead, like he knew the cancer would come back. And it did. Last year, fiercer than before, Lauren stopped visiting the hospital altogether, saying it was too hard. Dan came alone, awkward and guilty, barely meeting my eyes. Sarah fought to keep Bob with us, but by summer 2025, he was gone, back in the present. I sip my coffee, the mug warm against my hands. The kitchen clock ticks, steady as a heartbeat, and I think about Lauren's story, the one she told that first night. Growing up in Clarksville, scraping by, she'd clawed her way to a better life. I can't help but wonder if that's what drives her the fear of falling back. It doesn't excuse what she's done, but it makes her human. Not just a villain in my story. Still, those papers in Bob's safe aren't just about her. They're about Dan, about saving him from a life built on lies. And Ethan, sweet Ethan, who deserves a dad who's whole. I remember a day in 1985 when Dan was 10. Bob took him fishing at Percy Priest Lake. Just the two of them. I stayed home, baking cookies, but when they came back, muddy and grinning, Dan ran to me with a fish no bigger than my hand. Mom. I caught it, he said, his eyes bright as stars. Bob winked at me, and we laughed until our sides hurt. That boy is still in there, I know it. But how do I reach him? Lauren's influence grew after the wedding, like kudzu choking a tree. She pushed Dan to buy a house they couldn't afford, a big modern thing in a gated community, far from the cozy bungalows of Franklin. She filled his head with ideas about networking and status, things Dan never cared about. When Ethan was born, I hoped he'd ground them, but Lauren used him as another prop for her Instagram life. She'd post photos of him in designer onesies, captioned with hashtags like blessed, but she never brought him to see us. He's got a play date, she'd say. Or, we're at a Mummy and Me class. Dan went along, always trying to please her, always falling short. Sarah saw through Lauren from the start. She's a user. Mom, she told me once, over coffee at Meridy's breadbasket. Dan's too blind to see it. I didn't argue, but I held on to hope, thinking love would fix things. Now with Bob gone and those papers burning a hole in my heart, I know hope alone isn't enough. I need to act, but I'm scared of pushing Dan away for good, scared of what Lauren might do to Ethan if she feels cornered. I walk to the living room, where Bob's old radio sits, still tuned to the country station he loved. I turn it on, and a Patsy Cline song fills the air, soft and mournful. It takes me back to 1990 when Bob and I danced in this room, Sarah and Dan asleep upstairs. You're my forever. Maggie, he said, his cheek against mine. That man saw me through every storm, and now he's left me a way to weather this one. I just have to find the courage to use it. I pick up the phone and dial Sarah. Can you come over, I ask. I need to show you something. She's here in 20 minutes, her nurse's scrub still on. Her eyes worried. I show her the papers, the painting, and tell her about the key. Dad was protecting us, she says, her voice thick. But what are you going to do? Mom, I don't have an answer yet, but I know I need to talk to Mr. Donovan, see what Bob planned. The truth is a heavy thing, but it's all I've got. As Sarah leaves, I stand at the door, watching her car disappear down Willow Lane. The streetlights flicker on, casting shadows on the sidewalk, and I feel a spark of something, maybe strength, maybe faith. This house, this town, this family they're worth fighting for, and I'm not done yet. I'm so glad you're here. Friends, walking through these memories with me. If this story's stirring up your own thoughts of family, love, or the battles you've fought, I'd love to hear from you. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what's a moment that changed your family forever? Let's keep turning these pages together, like flipping through an old photo album on a quiet afternoon. Hey there, my dear friends. Have you ever stood in a moment so heavy it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for you to break or stand tall? I am Maggie Sullivan, still here at 312 Willow Lane in Franklin, Tennessee, where the October air carries the scent of fallen leaves and memories. Last time, I shared how I found those papers in Bob's safe, proof of Lauren's betrayal, and that old watercolor painting that stirred up dreams I'd long buried. Today, I'm taking you back to the day we laid Bob to rest, a day that cut deeper than I ever expected. If you're out there, maybe wrapped in a quilt with a cup of tea, I'm so glad you're with me. Let's walk through this together, like old friends sharing a story over a warm kitchen table. It was a grey morning, October 10th, when we gathered at the First Presbyterian Church to say goodbye to Bob. The church sits at the heart of Franklin, its red brick steeple a beacon for folks like us who've called this town home for decades. Inside, the pews were packed with faces, some familiar, like our neighbour Mrs. Thompson, who always brought us peach cobbler, and some I barely recognised, colleagues from Bob's engineering days. The stained glass windows threw patches of red and blue across the oak floor, and the air was thick with the scent of lilies, Bob's favourite flower. I sat in the front pew, my hands folded in my lap, the weight of 50 years with Bob pressing on my chest like a stone. Sarah was beside me, her nurse's hand steady but her eyes red from crying. You okay? Mom, she whispered, squeezing my arm. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was. How do you say goodbye to the man who was your home, your laughter, your everything? Dan sat 2 rows back with Lauren, his face pale, his tie slightly crooked. Lauren, in a sleek black dress and pearl earrings, looked more like she was headed to a board meeting than a funeral. Ethan, My sweet grandson. Wasn't there, Lauren said he was too young for such things, though I knew he'd have wanted to say goodbye to his grandpa. The service began with a hymn, Amazing Grace, the organ's notes filling the room like a warm embrace. The pastor spoke about Bob's life, his work, his love for the Tennessee Titans, the way he'd fix anyone's leaky faucet without asking for a dime. I barely heard him, my mind drifting to memories. Bob and I dancing in the kitchen to Patsy Cline, his calloused hands gentle on my waist. The night Dan was born, Bob crying harder than I did. Quiet evenings on our porch swing, watching fireflies with Sarah asleep in his lap. 50 years, gone in a blink. When it was my turn to speak, my legs felt like jelly. But I made it to the podium. I looked out at the sea of faces, some wet with tears, some solemn. Bob was my home. I started, my voice shaky. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine. He taught me love isn't just the big moments, it's the quiet ones, like holding hands on the porch swing or laughing over burnt biscuits. I paused, my throat tight. We had our struggles, like any couple, but we faced them together. That's what I'll carry with me. Always. I was about to say more when I heard it, a voice, sharp and sly, carried by the microphone near the second pew. Maggie's putting on quite a show. Isn't she, Lauren said. Her words meant for her friend beside her, but loud enough for half the church to catch. As if Bob wasn't done with her years ago. The room went still, like someone had sucked the air out. A few folks gasped, others turned to stare. Sarah half rose from her seat, her face red with fury, but I caught her eye and shook my head. Not here, not now. My hands gripped the podium, the wood cool under my fingers. Lauren's words weren't true. Bob and I had loved each other fiercely until the end, but they stung like a wasp, sharp and burning. Worse was Dan's silence. He sat there, head bowed, not a word to defend me. I wanted to crumble, to run from that church and never look back. But I thought of Bob, how he'd always say, "Maggie, you're stronger than you know." So I took a breath, steady as I could, and finished. "I'll miss him every day," I said, tears spilling over, but his love is still with us. In this family, in this town. I made it back to my seat, Sarah's arm around me, her voice low and fierce. How dare she? "Mom." In Dad's church, of all places I didn't answer, too numb to speak. The rest of the service passed in a fog, more hymns. A prayer, the pastor's final words. As we filed out, Lauren walked ahead with Dan, her heels clicking on the stone floor, her head high like she'd won some kind of prize. I saw Mrs. Thompson shake her head, muttering, "Bless her heart, that girl's got no shame." In Franklin, bless her heart can mean a lot of things, but none of them kind. Sarah drove me home, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Mom, you don't deserve that," she said, her voice trembling. Lauren's poison, and Dan's letting her get away with it. I could have slapped her right there in the pew. I managed a small smile, though it felt like lifting a boulder. "He's still our Dan," I said softly. "Somewhere in there. He's still the boy who loved us." Sarah snorted, her eyes on the road. "He's got a funny way of showing it." We pulled into Willow Lane, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Our house looked the same red brick, white shutters. The oak tree standing guard, but it felt empty without Bob. Inside. I sank into the couch, still in my black dress, the weight of the day pressing me down. Sarah made tea, her movements quick and practiced, like she was still in the hospital tending to patients. "You want me to stay?" she asked, handing me a mug. I shook my head. "I need some time, honey. But thank you." After she left, I sat on the porch swing, the one Bob built when Dan was born. The air was cool, the stars peeking through the clouds, and I let myself cry. Not just for Bob, but for Dan, for the family we used to be. I thought about Lauren's words, how they'd cut deeper because they echoed my fears. Was I just an old woman clinging to a past that didn't matter anymore? Had I lost Dan for good? The oak tree rustled, like it was trying to answer. And I remembered a day in 1988 when Bob and I sat here with Dan and Sarah, eating watermelon and spitting seeds into the grass. Dan was 8, Sarah 6, and they'd laughed until they couldn't breathe. That laughter was gone now, replaced by Lauren's venom and Dan's silence. I went inside, my steps heavy, and found a stack of mail on the counter. Among the sympathy cards was an envelope from Donovan and Associates, our lawyer's office in downtown Franklin. I opened it, expecting a bill or some legal form, but instead, I found a small brass key and a note in Bob's handwriting. "When you're ready, Maggie, love, Bob." My heart skipped. Bob had always been a planner, but this felt different, like a message from beyond. I held the key, its edges smooth from years in his pocket, and knew it was meant for the safe in his study. But I wasn't ready, not yet. Lauren's words were still raw, and I needed time to gather my strength. The next morning, I met Sarah at Meridy's Breadbasket, our favorite spot in Franklin. The bakery smelled of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee, and the wooden tables were crowded with locals swapping gossip. Sarah slid into the booth across from me, her hair pulled back, her eyes still angry. "I saw Lauren's Instagram last night," she said, stirring her latte. "Posted a photo of a new handbag, captioned retail therapy. Can you believe it? Dad's barely gone. And she's shopping." I sighed, the tea in my cup growing cold. She's always been like that. "Sarah, it's Dan I'm worried about." Sarah leaned forward, her voice low. "Mom, you can't keep excusing him. He let her talk that way about you, in church, at Dad's funeral. What's it going to take for him to wake up?" I didn't have an answer, but her words stuck with me, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. We talked a while longer, about Ethan, about work, but my mind kept drifting to that key. What had Bob left for me, and why now, when I felt so broken back home? I sat in the kitchen, the envelope from Donovan on the table. The clock ticked, steady and sure. And I thought about Bob's last months. He'd been so calm, even as the cancer took him. "Promise me you'll look after Dan," he'd said one night in the hospital, his hand weak in mine. "He's lost Maggie, but he's not gone." I'd promised, though I didn't know how to keep it. Now, with Lauren's cruelty fresh in my mind and Dan's silence weighing heavy, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I walked to Bob's study, the key in my pocket, and stood before the safe. The house was quiet, the only sound the hum of the fridge and the rustle of leaves outside. I thought of Sarah's anger, Ethan's smile, Bob's love. Whatever was in that safe, it was Bob's last gift to me, to us. I took a deep breath, my fingers steady for the first time in days, and turned the key. That's where I'll pause, friends, with my hand on that safe, ready to uncover what Bob left behind. I'm so thankful you're here, sharing this journey through the highs and lows of our little family. If this story's touched you, maybe brought back a memory of a day that tested your strength, I'd love to hear about it. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. Where are you watching from? And what's a moment that made you stand taller? Let's keep walking this path, like neighbors catching up over a fence on a cool autumn evening. Well, hello again, my dear friends. Have you ever held a truth so sharp it felt like it could cut you just by touching it? I'm Maggie Sullivan, still here at 312 Willow Lane in Franklin, Tennessee, where the oak tree out back sways like it's whispering secrets. Last time, I left you at Bob's funeral, where Lauren's cruel words stung me deep, and I found that key from Bob, leading me to the safe in his study. Those papers inside proof of Lauren's lies, and that old watercolor painting of mine shook me to my core. Today, I'm opening my heart to tell you what happened next, when I had to decide whether to use that truth to save my son or risk losing him forever. If you're out there, maybe knitting by a window or sipping tea, I'm so grateful you're with me. Let's sit a spell and see where this road takes us. It was the day after I opened Bob's safe. October 12th, and the morning light filtered through the kitchen curtains, soft and golden. I sat at the table, the manila envelope from the safe in front of me, its edges worn from Bob's careful hands, the papers inside bank statements, text messages. That divorce lawyer's letter were like a storm waiting to break. I sipped my coffee, the mug warm against my palms, and thought about Dan, my boy, with his father's blue eyes and quiet laugh, was trapped in a marriage that was draining him dry. And Ethan, my sweet grandson, deserved better than a mother who saw him as a prop for her Instagram life. But showing Dan these papers meant shattering his world. Could I do that to him, sir? Sarah came over around noon, her nurse's scrubs swapped for jeans and a sweater. She'd brought a box of cinnamon rolls from Meridy's breadbasket, the kind Bob used to sneak before dinner. "You look like you haven't slept." "Mom," she said, setting the box on the counter. I smiled, though it felt brittle. "I've been wrestling with Ghost," I said, sliding the envelope toward her. She opened it, her eyes scanning the papers, and her face hardened. "Dad knew," she said, her voice low. "He knew what Lauren was doing all along." I nodded, my throat tight. "But what do I do with it?" "Sarah, if I show Dan, it'll break him. If I don't, Lauren will keep pulling him away." Sarah sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "Mom, Dan's already breaking. You saw him at the funeral, didn't say a word when Lauren trashed you. He's not himself, hasn't been for years." She paused, her eyes softening. "Dad left you this for a reason. He trusted you to do what's right." I looked out the window, where the oak tree stood tall against the grey sky. Sarah was right, Bob had always trusted me, even when I doubted myself, but this felt like walking a tightrope with no net. That afternoon, I called Mr. Donovan, our lawyer, and asked to meet at his office in downtown Franklin. His building was a squat brick thing, just off Main Street, with creaky floors and a receptionist who offered me peppermint candy. Mr. Donovan, a wiry man with glasses perched on his nose, greeted me warmly. "Maggie, I'm so sorry about Bob," he said, ushering me into his office. He was a good man. I thanked him, then handed him the envelope. "Bob left this in his safe. I need to know what it means." He read through the papers, his brow furrowing. Bob was thorough. He said finally, "These documents, bank transfers, messages. The lawyer's letter paint a clear picture of financial misconduct and intent to deceive. If Dan were to pursue legal action, say for divorce or custody, this would be compelling." He looked at me over his glasses. "But you're not here for legal advice, are you? You're here for what Bob wanted." I nodded, my hands clasped tight. "I need to protect Dan and Ethan, but I don't want to hurt them." Mr. Donovan leaned back, his chair creaking. "Bob came to me last year, when the cancer came back. He suspected Lauren was siphoning money, planning to leave Dan once she got her hands on an inheritance. He had a private investigator pull these records. He wanted you to have them, Maggie, but only when you were ready to act." I felt a lump in my throat. Bob, even in his final months, had been shielding us. "What do I do now?" I asked. Mr. Donovan smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You know Dan better than anyone. Trust your heart. Back home." I sat on the porch swing, the envelope in my lap. The air was cool, smelling of rain, and the streetlights on Willow Lane flickered on. I thought about a night in 1995 when Dan was 15 and we'd sat here after he got in trouble for skipping school. I just wanted to fit in. "Mom," he'd said, his voice small. I'd hugged him and said, "You're enough, just as you are." Now, Lauren had made him feel like he was never enough, and I'd let it happen, thinking patience would fix it. No more waiting. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. I opened the door to find Lauren, her blonde hair perfect, her suit tailored, a designer handbag swinging from her arm. "Maggie," she said, her smile as polished as a car salesman's. "Can we talk, woman to woman?" I hesitated, then stepped aside, my stomach knotting. She sat on the couch, crossing her legs like she owned the place. "This house has so much charm," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "But it's a lot for one person, don't you think? With some upgrades, it could fetch a pretty penny." "It's not for sale," I said flatly, standing by the fireplace. Lauren's smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened. "Of course not, but let's be practical. Maintaining this place will be costly, and Dan deserves his fair share of Bob's estate. That foundation for kids' cancer is sweet, but family comes first." "Right," she leaned forward, her voice smooth as honey. "If we contest the will together, we could split things fair and square, good for everyone." I felt a fire in my chest, one I hadn't felt in years. "Everyone meaning you," I said, my voice steady. "You've never cared about this family. Lauren, you've only cared about what you could take." Her smile faltered, just for a second. "You've always had it out for me." "Maggie," she said, standing, "you've poisoned Dan against me from the start." I stepped closer, my hands clenched. "No, Lauren, you've done that yourself. I know about the money you moved, the messages you sent, the lawyer you hired. Your game's over." Her face went pale, her lips parting. "You're bluffing," she said. But her voice shook. "Dan will choose me. He always does." I opened the door, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. "If you believe that, you don't know Dan at all, and you sure don't know this family." She stormed out, her heels clicking down the porch steps, but not before turning back. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I closed the door, my hand on the knob, and felt Bob's presence, like a warm hand on my shoulder. That night, I couldn't sleep, the confrontation replaying in my mind. I sat in Bob's study, the watercolor painting on the desk, its colors soft under the lamp. I remembered a day in 1978 when Bob and I took Dan and Sarah to Percy Priest Lake for a picnic. Dan, just 3, chased dragonflies, his laughter ringing out. Bob wrapped his arm around me and said, "This is all I'll ever need." Maggie, that love was still here, in this house, in our family. I had to believe Dan could find it again. The next morning, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Dan. Looking like he hadn't slept in days unshaven, his shirt rumpled, a small suitcase at his feet. "Mom," he said, his voice rough, "can I come in?" My heart leaped, but I kept my face calm. Stepping aside, he sank onto the couch, his hands running through his hair, a gesture so like Bob's it hurt. "Lauren and I fought." He said, "Bad. She wants me to cut you out completely, says it's her or you." He looked up, his eyes red. When I didn't agree, she said things. Said she never loved Dad, that she was just waiting for him to die so we could get the money. I sat beside him, my heart breaking for my boy. "What did you say?" I asked softly. He swallowed hard. I left, grabbed some clothes and walked out. I didn't know where else to go. For the first time in years, I saw the Dan. I knew the boy who'd carved his name in our table, who'd cried when he caught his first fish, but I knew this was the moment. I couldn't protect him from the truth anymore. "Dan," I said, my voice steady. "Your dad left something for us." I went to the study and brought back the envelope, setting it on the coffee table. The room was quiet, the only sound the tick of the clock. "These are from his safe," I said. "I think he wanted you to see them." Dan opened the envelope, his hand shaking. He read the bank statements, the messages, the lawyer's letter, his face going from shock to anger to a deep, wrenching sadness. "All this time," he whispered, "I defended her. I chose her over you and Dad. She was convincing," I said gently, touching his arm. "But you're here now. That's what matters." He set the papers down, his shoulders slumping. I should have seen it. "Mom, I was blind." I took his hand, feeling its warmth. So like Bob's. "Your dad never stopped believing in you. Neither did I. The boy we raised is still in there, Dan." He pulled me into a hug, his breath ragged, and for a moment, we were just mother and son, holding on through the storm. We sat there a long time, the papers between us, the weight of the truth settling in. Dan looked at the watercolor painting, still on the table. "You painted that?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded. "A long time ago." "Before you were born." He smiled, a ghost of the boy he'd been. "It's beautiful, Mom. You should paint again." I felt a warmth in my chest, like a seed starting to sprout. Maybe I would. As Dan left, promising to call tomorrow. I stood in the doorway, watching his car disappear down Willow Lane. The street was quiet, the oak tree casting long shadows. I felt lighter, like I'd set down a burden I'd carried too long. Bob's plan was working, guiding us back to each other. But I knew Lauren wouldn't give up easily. There was a fight ahead, for Dan, for Ethan, for our family. I'm so thankful you're here. Friends, sharing these moments of pain and hope. If this story stirred up memories of your own battles or the love that pulled you through, I'd love to hear from you. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what's a truth you've had to face to save someone you love? Let's keep weaving this story, like a quilt we're stitching together, one heartfelt square at a time. Hey there, my dear friends. Have you ever faced a moment where the truth you've been carrying finally finds its voice, and you realize it's not just about winning, but about setting things right? I'm Maggie Sullivan, still here at 312 Willow Lane in Franklin, Tennessee, where the oak tree out back stands tall, like it's watching over us through every storm. Last time, I told you about the day I stood up to Lauren and showed Dan those papers from Bob's safe, the ones that laid her lies bare. It was a turning point, but the road ahead wasn't easy. Today, I'm opening my heart to share what happened in the courtroom, where we fought for Ethan, and the moment Lauren showed a glimpse of who she might have been. If you're out there, maybe rocking in a chair, with a warm drink, I'm so thankful you're with me. Let's sit together and see how this chapter unfolds. It was late October 2025, and the air in Franklin had turned crisp, the kind that makes you pull your sweater tight. I was up early, standing in my kitchen, the smell of coffee mixing with the faint scent of cinnamon from a pie I'd baked the night before. The envelope from Bob's safe sat on the counter, its contents now copied and organized for Mr. Donovan, our lawyer. Dan had moved into a small apartment 3 blocks away, and Ethan was staying with him most nights, but Lauren wasn't letting go without a fight. She'd hired a fancy lawyer from Nashville and was spinning a story that Dan was unstable, unfit to care for their son. The thought of her using Ethan like a pawn made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. Bob had taught me that strength isn't loud, it's steady. Sarah came by around 8, her nurse's badge clipped to her jacket. "You ready for today?" "Mom," she asked, grabbing a slice of pie. I nodded, though my stomach was in knots. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, smoothing my dress, a simple navy one Bob always liked. "Dad's with us," Sarah said. Her eyes soft. Those papers are his way of fighting for Ethan. I squeezed her hand. Grateful for her fire, Sarah had been digging too, saving screenshots of Lauren's Instagram post, new handbags, spa days, all while she claimed financial hardship. It wasn't much, but it showed who she really was. The Franklin Courthouse, a grey stone building just off Main Street, was older than me, with steps worn smooth by years of folks seeking justice. Inside, the courtroom smelled of polished wood and dust, and the pews creaked as we sat. Dan was beside me, his tie knotted tight, his face pale but determined. Ethan was with a sitter Lauren insisted he not be there, and for once, I agreed. No 8-year-old should see his parents tear each other apart. Mr. Donovan adjusted his glasses, his briefcase open on the table, while Lauren sat across the aisle, her lawyer whispering in her ear. She looked flawless, her blonde hair swept up, but her eyes were hard, like she was daring us to try. The judge, a woman with grey hair and a no-nonsense stare, called the session to order. Mr. Donovan went first, laying out Dan's case for primary custody. Mr. Sullivan is a devoted father, he said, his voice calm. He's provided a stable home, and his son's well-being is his priority. Then he presented Bob's evidence, the bank statements showing Lauren's secret transfers, the text messages mocking our family, the divorce lawyer's letter proving her intent to leave Dan after securing money. The courtroom was quiet, the only sound the rustle of papers. I glanced at Lauren, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. Lauren's lawyer stood, a slick man in a pinstripe suit, and painted a different picture. Ms. Mitchell has been the primary caregiver, he said. Mr. Sullivan's recent behavior leaving the marital home, acting erratically, raises concerns about his stability. He even brought up Bob's will, claiming Dan's small inheritance showed family discord. I felt Dan tense beside me, his jaw tight. Sarah whispered, "They're grasping at straws." Mum, I hope she was right. When Mr. Donovan cross-examined, he was like a hound on a scent. Ms. Mitchell, he said, holding up a bank statement. Can you explain why $20,000 was transferred from your joint account to one in your name alone last year? Lauren stammered, her voice thin. It was for investments. Mr. Donovan didn't let up. And these messages, where you call your in-laws stingy fools and discuss cashing in after Mr. Sullivan's death. Are those investments? The judge's eyes narrowed, and Lauren's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The truth was out, and it was ugly. Dan took the stand next, his voice steady but raw. I love my son, he said. I've made mistakes, let things slide I shouldn't have. But I'm here now, and I'll do whatever it takes to give Ethan a good life. I felt tears prick my eyes, seeing the boy I raised in him again. Lauren didn't testify. Her lawyer said she was too emotional, but I saw her wipe her eyes. And for a moment, I wondered if she felt anything real. The judge called a recess, and we stepped outside. The autumn air sharp against my face. Sarah bought us coffee from a cart, and we stood under a maple tree, its leaves blazing red. We've got her, Mom, Sarah said. But Dan shook his head. She'll spin this somehow, he said. She always does. I touched his arm. Not this time, honey. Your dad made sure of that. He gave me a small smile, the first I'd seen in weeks, back in the courtroom. The judge delivered her ruling. Based on the evidence, she said, I find Miss Mitchell's actions demonstrate a pattern of financial deceit and disregard for her son's best interests. Primary custody is awarded to Mr. Sullivan, with Ms. Mitchell granted supervised visitation pending completion of counseling. Dan let out a breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. Lauren stood, her face a mask of fury, and stormed out, her lawyer trailing behind. I felt no joy, only a quiet resolve. Ethan was safe, and that was enough. That night, Dan called me from his apartment. Lauren left a voicemail, he said, his voice heavy. Said she's moving to California, starting over. She apologized. Mom said she went too far, that she was scared of ending up poor again. I sat in Bob's study, the watercolor painting on the desk, and listened. What did you say? I asked. Nothing, he said. I don't think she meant it. She's already got some guy out there. From what her friends are posting. I sighed, thinking of the girl from Clarksville who'd fought her way up, only to lose herself in greed. Let her go. Dan, I said, you've got Ethan and you've got us. The next day, I found something that brought Bob closer. I was cleaning the garage, sorting through boxes of his old tools, when I stumbled on a leather journal. Its pages yellowed. It was Bob's, started after his first cancer diagnosis in 2022. I sat on a stool, the air smelling of oil and sawdust, and read. I've been thinking about legacy, he wrote. Not money or things, but the love we leave behind. Dan's lost, caught in Lauren's web, but I know the boy we raised is still there. I'm leaving Maggie what she needs to bring him back. My eyes blurred with tears. Another entry. From last year, Maggie thinks I'm too hard on Dan, but I have to give him a clear path home. When he breaks free, we'll be waiting. I remembered a day in 1995 when Dan was 15 and Bob took him to a Tennessee Titans game. They came home, faces painted blue, laughing about a last-minute touchdown. Best day ever. Mom, Dan said, hugging me. Bob had winked, like he knew those moments would anchor Dan through harder times. Now, reading his journal, I felt Bob's faith in us, like a warm hand on my heart. Dan came over that evening, Ethan in tow. We sat in the backyard, the oak tree casting long shadows, and watched Ethan chase fireflies, his giggles lighting up the dusk. I'm filing for divorce, Dan said, his voice quiet. I want Ethan to grow up knowing what real love looks like. I nodded, my heart swelling. You're doing right by him, I said, and by yourself. He looked at me, his eyes clear. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I hugged him, feeling the years of distance melt away. You're here now, honey. That's all I need. Sarah joined us, bringing a pitcher of sweet tea, and we talked about small things, Ethan's school, Sarah's new patient, the Main Street Festival coming up. It was the first time in years we felt like a family. Not perfect, but whole. I thought of Bob's journal, his words about love being our legacy. He'd given us this moment, this chance to start again, later. I went to the living room and looked at the watercolor painting, now framed on the wall. It wasn't just a memory, it was a promise. I'd signed up for a painting class at the Franklin Library, starting next week. Maybe I'd paint the oak tree or the sunset over Percy Priest Lake again. I was 70, but I wasn't done dreaming. Bob had known that, and he'd left me the courage to see it. As I turned off the lights, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge, I felt a peace I hadn't known since Bob got sick. Lauren was gone. Dan was finding his way, and Ethan was safe. The fight wasn't over. Divorce and custody would bring more battles, but we'd face them together. Bob's love, like that oak tree, was still standing, strong and sure. I'm so glad you're here, friends, walking through these trials and triumphs with me. If this story's touched your heart, maybe reminded you of a time you fought for family or found a new beginning, I'd love to hear about it. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. Where are you watching from? And what's a moment that gave you hope when all seemed lost? Let's keep stitching this story, like a quilt we're wrapping around each other for warmth. Well, hello, my dear friends. Have you ever looked back on a year and realized how far you've come? Like a seed you didn't know was planted, finally blooming into something beautiful. I'm Maggie Sullivan, still here at 312 Willow Lane in Franklin, Tennessee, where the oak tree out back is budding green again, whispering promises of spring. Last time, I shared the courtroom battle, where Bob's evidence saved Ethan from Lauren's grasp, and Dan started finding his way back to us. Today, I'm opening my heart to tell you how our family healed, how I picked up my paintbrush again, and how Bob's love still guides us, even now. If you're out there, maybe sipping lemonade on your porch or flipping through an old photo album, I'm so grateful you're with me. Let's sit together one last time and see how this story ends, or maybe how it begins anew. It's October 2026, a year since Bob's funeral, and the air in Franklin is soft, with that golden light that makes everything feel like a memory. I'm in my backyard, under the oak tree that's seen us through so much, watching Ethan chase a butterfly across the grass. He's 9 now, his gap-toothed grin wider than ever, his sneakers muddy from running. Dan's at the grill, flipping burgers the way Bob taught him, the sizzle and smoke curling up like an offering. Sarah's setting out a platter of sliced watermelon, her laughter mingling with the bluegrass music playing from a portable radio. It's Ethan's birthday party, and the yard is alive with kids from his school, neighbors, and family friends, all gathered to celebrate, for the first time in years. This house feels full again, not just of people, but of love. I lean back in a lawn chair, my hands wrapped around a glass of sweet tea, and let the moment sink in. A year ago, I stood in Bob's study, holding those papers that tore Lauren's lies apart, wondering if we'd ever find our way back to each other. The road wasn't easy. After the courtroom, Lauren fought hard, spreading lies about Dan's mental health, claiming she was the victim. She even tried to turn Ethan against him, telling him Dan abandoned them. But Bob's evidence, those bank statements, messages, and that divorce lawyer's letter painted a clear picture. The judge saw through her, and so did the truth. Lauren moved to California with a new boyfriend, her visits with Ethan growing rarer. Last I heard, she was posting Instagram photos from some beach, still chasing a life that glitters but doesn't last. Dan's changed so much. It's like seeing the sun after a long storm. He's settled into a cozy house 3 blocks away, close enough for Ethan to bike over after school. He's back to selling real estate, but on his terms now, focusing on families looking for homes in Franklin's quiet neighborhoods. Not the flashy deals Lauren pushed him toward. He's softer, too, more like the boy who used to carve his name in our kitchen table. We've had hard talks, him and me, about the years he pulled away, the times he chose Lauren over us. I was lost. Mom, he told me one night over coffee, I thought I had to be someone else to make her happy. I hugged him and said, "You're enough, Dan, just as you are." Those words, ones I told him when he was a boy, finally sank in. Sarah's been our rock, always showing up with her quick laugh and fierce heart. She's taken to organizing family dinners every Sunday, just like we used to, and this backyard has become our gathering place again. Ethan loves it here, climbing the oak tree or digging in the dirt for treasures. He started asking about Bob, wanting to know the grandpa who loved him so much. Did Grandpa really catch a fish this big, he'll say, stretching his arms wide. I laugh and tell him stories about Bob teaching Dan to fish at Percy Priest Lake, or building this very swing we're sitting on. Those stories keep Bob alive, weaving him into Ethan's heart. I've changed too, in ways I didn't expect at 70. That watercolor painting from in 72, the one Bob kept in his safe, hangs in my living room now, a reminder of the girl who dreamed of being an artist. Last November, I signed up for a painting class at the Franklin Library, nervous as a schoolgirl. The teacher, a kind woman named Miss Clara, saw my shaky first strokes and said, "Maggie, Mo, you've got a gift, don't hide it." So I didn't. I've painted the oak tree, the sunset over Percy Priest Lake, even the front porch of Meredy's breadbasket, where Sarah and I still meet for coffee. My paintings aren't perfect, but they're mine, and every brushstroke feels like reclaiming a piece of myself. Last week, I found something that tied it all together. I was in the attic, sorting through old Christmas decorations, when I stumbled on a box labeled Bob's Keepsakes. Inside was a small journal, different from the one in the garage, its leather cover soft from years of handling. I sat on the floor, dust motes dancing in the sunlight, and read. It was Bob's thoughts from his final months, written in that slanted script I loved. Maggie's the heart of this family. He wrote in one entry, "She thinks she's just holding us together, but she's the one who makes us shine." I hope she paints again, sees the beauty she brings to the world. My throat tightened, tears spilling over. Another entry, dated just days before he passed. Dan will come back. I know it. And when he does, Maggie will be there, like she always is, with love bigger than any mistake. I remembered a night in 1980 when Bob and I sat on the porch swing, Dan and Sarah asleep inside. The stars were bright, the air thick with honeysuckle, and Bob took my hand. "You're my forever." "Maggie," he said, his voice low, "no matter what comes, we'll face it together." That promise held true. Even after he was gone, his journal, his evidence, that key, they were his way of facing this last storm with me, guiding us back to each other. Dan and I have kept healing, slowly, like a quilt stitched one square at a time. He's joined me at the Main Street Festival this year, something he hasn't done since Ethan was a baby. We walk through the booths, eating kettle corn and listening to bluegrass, Ethan tugging at Dan's hand to see the jugglers. "This is what I missed," Dan said, his eyes soft, "being here, with you." I smiled, feeling Bob's presence in the warmth of the day. Sarah was there, too, snapping photos, her laughter as bright as the autumn leaves. Ethan's birthday party today is proof of how far we've come. The kids are playing tag, their shouts filling the air. And Mrs. Thompson from next door brings over her famous peach cobbler. Dan flips a burger, catching Ethan's eye and winking, just like Bob used to. Sarah sets out paper plates, humming along to the radio, and I sit here, watching it all. My heart's so full it hurts. I think of Bob's last journal entry, the one I read last night, Maggie. "You're stronger than you know. Keep loving, keep dreaming. I'll be waiting, under the stars." I look up, the sky turning pink with dusk, and I swear I feel him, right here with us. I've hung a new painting in the dining room, one I finished last month. It's the oak tree, its branches reaching wide, rooted deep in the earth. It's not just a tree, it's us, this family, standing through every season, bending but never breaking. I'm 71 now, and I'm painting, laughing, loving in ways I thought I'd lost. Bob's love, like that tree, is our legacy, growing stronger with every day we choose each other. As the party winds down, Ethan runs to me, a caterpillar in his hand. "Grandma, can we keep it? I want to see it turn into a butterfly." I laugh, ruffling his hair. "Of course, sweetheart. Your grandpa would have loved that." We find a jar, poke holes in the lid, and set it on the porch. Dan joins us, his arm around Ethan, and Sarah snaps a photo. "For the album," she says, grinning. I look at them, my son, my daughter, my grandson, and know this is what Bob wanted. Not a perfect family, but a real one, stitched together by love. The stars come out, twinkling above Willow Lane, and I sit on the porch swing, the journal in my lap. The house is quiet now, the guests gone, the grill cooling. I think of Bob, of the life we built, of the love that outlasts even death. I was afraid, a year ago, that I'd lost everything. But here I am, painting, dreaming, surrounded by family. Life doesn't end at 70 or any age. It's a canvas, And we get to keep adding colors. No matter how many years we've got, this is where my story ends. Friends, or maybe where it starts again. I've poured my heart out, sharing the pain, the fight, and the joy of finding our way back. Bob's love, Dan's courage, Sarah's fire. Ethan's laughter, they're my colors now, and I'm painting with them every day. I hope this story's touched you, maybe reminded you of your own strength, your own family, your own dreams. If it has, I'd love for you to join me for more stories, more moments that make us feel alive. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. Where are you watching from? And what's a dream you're ready to pick up again? Let's keep sharing these tales. Like neighbors passing recipes over the fence, building something beautiful together.